Hi, well it's fantastic to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I'm a science writer, and as a science writer I'm always interested in new ways of reaching audiences. I mean, in the past year I've even taken up stand-up comedy. So when Henry came up with the, asked me would I be interested in doing an app for the iPad, I jumped at the chance. Now Henry had no expertise, did you, at the time, but he found a company called Touch Press, which is a UK US company that did have the expertise. And as Henry said, they created an app called The Elements, which was essentially, they featured the 92 naturally occurring elements and the artificial ones. They created three-dimensional images of artifacts made out of all of these elements, which on the iPad you could rotate, and I think you could zoom in and out, I'm not sure, and you could see in 3D, very high resolution. And they attached stories about each of these elements, informative stories, quirky stories, humorous stories, provided a lot of data as well. So that was kind of the model, and they launched this app at exactly the same time that the iPad was launched, which I believe was January 2010, January last year, April in America. And so they were very, very fortunate, because Apple saw this and saw that it showed what the iPad could do, and they put it in their television ads. So the Elements has done extremely well. I think it's sold about 160,000 copies in the last, in less than a year, and that's at $15, 15 US dollars. So the revenue, you can work it out, it's about $2.5 million. Apple takes, I think, about a third, something like that. So it's been very, very profitable. So Henry and Faber decided to work with Touch Press. The idea was that Touch Press would provide the technical expertise, the programming, the design, and that Faber would provide the editorial expertise, obviously its name in publishing, and an author, and that's me. So the project that was decided to be the successor to the Elements was, as Henry has said, the solar system. So the idea was, instead of featuring elements on the iPad, was to feature planets, moons, asteroids, comets, these kind of things, and on each page to present three-dimensional images of these objects taken from real astronomical space probe data, images that you could zoom in and out of, that you could rotate, that you could tumble end over end, and provide and attach to these stories, which were be informative, going quirky, humorous about these objects, have a kind of interactive link to real-time data on these objects, which is through Wolfram Alpha, isn't it? The Wolfram Alpha system. So that was the idea. Now, this was an incredibly different project for me than my normal projects. As an author, you normally have total control, not only over the content of what you write, but even the length. But here, there was a very large team of people involved. And so there were a lot of compromises to be made. I can give you some examples of how it worked. At the beginning of every week, I would have a 3-hour Skype conference call with the project manager. I mean, it's had a project manager. It's not like a book. The project manager who actually was a windsurfer who lived on a beach in Kent, in the southeast of England. Him and the image expert. And we would spend about 3 hours going through my outline to decide which stories we would cover and which we wouldn't, which we would discard. And compromises had to be made, because sometimes we had lots of really nice images, so I would then have to write a story that I didn't actually, I hadn't thought that I would write. The project manager had no science background whatsoever, so his input was actually very useful. Sometimes he would say things like, the sun is a ball of gas, yet it seems to have a surface. How can that be? So, with his insight into what average normal people didn't understand, I was able to write things that I wouldn't have done if I was writing on my own. In addition to these 3-hour meetings about the content, we'd have another 3-hour conference call about the images, and what we would include, videos, what we might film. I mean, I remember one long conversation for about an hour where we discussed whether we could make an ice cube the shape of Saturn and film it in slow motion splashing into a gin and tonic. Because Saturn is actually lighter than water, and if you had a big enough bath, you could actually, it would actually float. Now, as it turned out, we didn't have time to do that because we had an A list of things that we really wanted to include in the app, and we had a B list of things that we would include if we had time, and we ran out of time. And time was a really big constraint. I had to write 120 stories about these 50 or 60 objects in about 9 weeks. And that meant about 16 or 17 of these stories had to be written a week. Some of them had to be researched because I didn't know anything about them. So that was quite a strain. And I do remember when I went out for a walk, I live in central London, when I went out for a walk, often to get fresh air or polluted air, I had to keep stopping every few minutes to scribble things in notepads. And I was even waking up in the middle of the night with things that I thought we ought to include in the app. So it was probably the hardest I've ever worked. In addition to the time constraints, there were really, really stringent space constraints because we decided that in the font that we were using, we did not want anyone to scroll to another page. We thought that would make it more too difficult, or not too difficult, but it would be ideal if they read each story on a page, which limited every story to 275 words. So really that was maybe 3 paragraphs, 4 paragraphs at the most. So sometimes to introduce a quite complex subject in that amount of space was very, very hard. Anyway, the app was released on the 22nd of December, which was kind of early enough to catch Christmas, but it was a kind of a bit late to get much publicity to promote it. However, there have been days since then when it's actually sold almost 2,000 a day. And the total sales net, well, I mean, I'm very indiscreet, Henry, but in the first calendar month it sold 25,000 at about $14, 14 US dollars. So that's quite a lot of money. I think the people, TouchPress and Faber, have already got back the money that they invested in its development. So would I do this again? Yeah. It was the hardest I've ever worked, but yes, I would do it again. It was fun to work in a large team of people. I mean, I'd be lying to you if I said that there weren't difficulties, but the pluses definitely outweighed the minuses. I got to do something which was highly illustrated. I mean, I think we got something like 1,000 high resolution images in the app. And I got to, we really did try and push the boundary of what was possible with the iPad.